I'd like to call the facilities meeting to order. Here we are, the 20th of August at 9:55. Okay. Thank you to Mr. McDevitt for moving that along. We're going to start off with the airport section of the facilities, and the first thing I want to do is approve the minutes from the prior meeting. Do I have Mr. Loeb, second by Mr. Garrity? All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay. Going on to number 3, which is the action agenda, new business. I'm going to hand it over now to Don DeGraw.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I have 2 resolution requests here, both for the same item, for the design of a new snow removal equipment building at the airport. The first one is to establish a capital project, which we have an FAA grant for, and the second is to authorize an agreement with CNS Engineers to perform the design.
I have a motion by Mr. Loeb. Do I have a second by Mr. McDevitt? Discussion? Ms. Bramer?
Thank you. Where is this going?
It's going in place of the 2 existing buildings we have on the airport.
That have the giant pieces of equipment in them now? No.
Yeah. When you come into the airport, right on the left-hand side, there's a really old 3-bay, and next to it's a sand shed. So those 2 buildings will be removed, and this will go in its place. Does that help you?
Well, Kevin's saying no to me.
Well,
I have a different...
I was actually saying no because when you say giant piece of equipment, I think you're thinking fire truck.
Oh, yes.
No, not the same building.
Yeah,
Okay.
not in the ARF building, though.
That's when you're going in and you go to the right. The
Correct.
fire building, the fire truck building is to the right, so not that one.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's pretty new. That's like a 1998.
Okay.
We're looking to remove like a 1938.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Mr. McDevitt?
And when ideally would construction occur?
We seem to have some momentum with this project, which has been sitting around for over 10 years, so we want to get the design done by the end of the year, pre-application in for construction, and get the construction grant next year. So I could see construction beginning next fall or next winter.
I just want to clarify, this motion is for both requests?
Yes.
Mr. Loeb, thank you. Mr. Wild?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Don, I'm just curious, the grant match for the construction, is that budgeted, or do you have an idea of how much it's going to cost in addition to whether it's...
Well, we have a very high estimate for construction of $3 million. It may come in less than that, and we'll be paying 5% on that.
150,000? And is that in a reserve fund somewhere for us?
We do have that much money in reserve, because that's where we choose to take it from, yes.
Ms. Bramer?
Just one more. I see that in the second resolution, this is for CNS, and wasn't it this year that we decided not to bid out to CNS? Is this...
Right, so these projects take years to get to this point, to bring it to you, and CNS had started this a long time ago. They put the design grant in. They work with the other companies to get us to this point. Also, the grant was based on their agreement, where we did an independent fee estimate, and which was approved by the FAA. So everything we've done this point has been with CNS
Okay.
from the beginning. So this is the last one they would do for us,
Yeah.
besides the construction administration.
Yeah, I believe we had determined that going forward, any new projects CNS would not be involved with, but any past projects that they had already done some work and involvement, we would honor that and go forward with that. Is that correct?
That's
Okay.
correct. Yeah,
Thank
this
you.
one in construction administration, when we get to the construction phase of it.
Thank you. Mr. Loeb?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I just want to verify if I heard correctly, $3 million for a building? Or
Yeah, well, we had initially put in for a 100% FAA grant, which we didn't get. So we wanted to be sure that we had plenty of money, because that was an upfront grant. But yeah, definitely over $2 million, because you have to remove the 2 existing and then put the new one in place.
what kind of building? And $3 million is a lot of building, even if it's after the demolition.
Yeah.
One might say
it's
for a snowplow.
Yeah, it's just a
Okay.
standard.
Well, and I know it's not just a snowplow.
Yeah, it's just a standard 6 to 10 bay steel building, nothing special.
Mr. Hajos?
I just want to add on to that, Supervisor Loeb, that the two buildings that we're demolishing, both of those buildings probably have some type of asbestos and lead-based paint in them. So that does raise the cost significantly on the demolition of those buildings.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Okay, number 4, that would be Mr. DeGraw or Mr. Hajos.
I'll take this one. Last month, we brought to the committee that we were looking at one of the land uses to be solar. The committee has given us approval or authorization to move forward with an RFP. First step in that was for us to meet with FAA and get a land use change from aviation to non-aviation use. We just had a conference call Don and I did with Jacobs Engineering and the FAA. They've agreed to look at it, but we've got to produce some paperwork basically for them first to say what we're going to do with the land use. And one of those will be a glare study for the solar. That's kind of the first step. So we will go forward with this RFP, but we have to discuss with FAA first the land use to get that, what do they refer to as a pen and ink change?
Pending change from aeronautical to non-aeronautical.
Discussion, Mr. Wild?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kevin, in the RFP, can we ask for a financial analysis of whatever they're proposing, such as the benefits that we might be able to get out of the solar, including any kind of maintenance and everything else that we might have to do?
Okay.
Thank you.
Ms. Bramer?
Thanks. I'm glad to see we're still moving forward. I know that there are other airports with solar arrays, and the glare has not been a problem, so I hope we can figure that out.
Yes, Mr. Hajos?
It's just a requirement from the FAA that we have to do that glare study.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's based on the angle of the solar array, where they're placed. Once we get through that study, then we'll determine, whether or not, it may be just changing the angle of the solar panels themselves.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Moving, you don't need any, yep. Number 5, information for discussion and review, the update on the FBO hangar and review. Mr. DeGraw?
The chairman has asked me to give you a monthly update on our FBO revenue and our hangar lease revenue. So what I'll do each month is tell you what we did last year and what we're doing now and the difference. So last year to date, trying to compare apples to apples, we made about $46,300. And this year, because of the new contract we have in place, we've made basically $91,000. So we have a difference of $44,645 to our benefit. So we're doing very well based on the new contract.
I think that's significant, and I've asked Mr. DeGraw to give us a monthly update because this committee and the board has made some tremendous strides in reducing the county's portion of funding the airport. And a lot of times that doesn't get out there. If we say it once, I know I've got to be told something 3 or 4 times before it sinks in, but we're going to give a monthly update. I've asked Mr. DeGraw, and he's been kind enough to do that. But that's significant to me. And again, taxpayers of the county like that because obviously their portion of funding the airport goes down, and we can use that money for other infrastructure problems or projects or whatever we decide to use it for. So thank you, Don. You're doing a great job out there, at least in my opinion, and reducing the costs and increasing the revenue is name of the game. Ms. Bramer, do you want to say something?
I think that most of the rest of the committee would agree that this is great to have the revenue going up, and it's being paid for by the people using the airport, and that we've asked each of our department heads to reduce the cost to the county, and this is just one example. I thank you, Don, for good work out there, and I'm glad that we're not seeing little problems coming up to us about parking signs and this and that. But I do want to bring to my fellow committee members' attention that this is exactly what we asked our building and codes department head to do. to reduce his budget expenses and to put some of that cost onto the people who are using that particular department. And we just shot down his proposal to increase the fees for people who are seeking building permits. So I would ask you to reconsider that when it comes up to that committee. Thank you.
I'm not gonna.
Thank you, Ms. Bramer. I think you're jumping to another committee with that, but thank you.
Sure am.
Mr. McDevitt?
Who negotiated this deal? This is a good deal.
Oh, I believe it was you, Mr. McDevitt, along with a couple other guys. So, great news is always fun to share, and we're going to do this monthly, like I just said. So, I remember just 3-4 years ago, the cost was close to $850,000 to $900,000 a year in revenue, well, in county support of the airport. Okay. Moving right along.
One last item, just a reminder that on September 17th, there'll be a B-17 at the airport, and they'll be given rides in the morning and in the afternoon, and tours in between. So just put that on your calendar. And that's all I have for you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. DeGraw. Any comments from this committee? From the, anybody else out in the room would like to make any comments? Okay, we will close then the airport section of the facilities meeting, and now we'll move on to the buildings and grounds section of the meeting. And we're gonna start right off. We've already approved the minutes. We're gonna start right off at number 3, which is action agenda new business, and that I'm going to hand this over to Mr. Hajos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first item we have, and the only item for a resolution request this month, is a notice of intent to fill the position of a cleaner. We just had a cleaner 2 weeks ago resign to take another job.
I'll make a motion.
Second. Motion by Mr. Strauss, second by Mr. Loeb. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed.
Under number 4, referral and pending items, the first thing we had on there, the committee authorized an RFP for construction for the OES building. I didn't come to Brian's meeting yesterday. I didn't know he was going to talk about any of this, but he has provided me all the material that we need to put out the RFP, so we will put it out. With that RFP, I had asked Brian McClure if there's other options that we would have as part of this building as kind of being different from just a building or standalone building alone. So electrical, plumbing, heating. So I think what we're going to do with the bid is put those items in as add alternates. Add alternates are normally put in a bid, and then you can just remove them in the process of the bid if the base price, which would just be the building, comes in too high. So I'm going to add those items in. If they're too high, and I'll bring it back to this committee when the bids come back, then we'll just remove those parts out of the bid.
Yes, Mr. Wild?
Mr. Chairman, thanks. Kevin, do you still have a sense of what the cost might end up being in terms of a range?
The cost that I probably provided you last time, which was a ballpark figure, is somewhere about that $450 range.
Thank you. Out of our general fund, right? That's where we're funding this?
Yes.
Any other discussion? Okay.
The next item we had in there was referral pending for the 6-month lease with D&G Recycling, but I think that will go into also under item number 5, correspondence from the attorney representing Perkins Recycling.
Yes, excuse me. As you recall, we had a 6-month lease agreement with D&G that the Board of Supervisors, I believe at the last meeting, authorized. That agreement has not yet been executed, pending, adjustments from the County Attorney's Office and DPW on the terms to make sure that the place stays clean. In the meantime, I received correspondence from Matthew Ludeman from Ludeman & Associates. They are representing Mr. Perkins, Robert Perkins, who I believe is here. Mr. Perkins, last year, when we RFP'd for the sale or the lease of this building, responded with a sale proposal. He was the only response who was interested in purchasing the property. The purchase price was $400,000, and he was willing to take on the environmental liabilities associated with that site. The Board of Supervisors at the December meeting decided to table that pending a subdivision and some other questions that they had about that property. We RFP'd this property again, either sale or lease, earlier in the early part of 2019. We got one response. It was from Mr. Perkins to lease the site for additional revenue. Currently, we're getting $4,000 a month, and the new proposal was $6,000 a month, increased by $500 for one bay that was being used by emergency services, and another $500 for the second bay that was being used by emergency services, for a total of $7,000 a month. The correspondence that I received indicated that Mr. Perkins is still interested in purchasing this facility. If the county is still interested in selling this facility, I can't speak for why I got the correspondence, but I think it may have had something to do with the fact that there was news on the county moving the emergency services equipment out of there and looking to construct a new building and trying to find revenue for that building. The process on this would be, if the committee wants us to go in this direction of investigating a sale one more time, the committee would direct us to do an RFP, and we would do that as expeditiously as possible so that we can get results back and bring it back to this committee for a determination.
Okay, how about discussion? Mr. Wild?
Mr. Chairman, I'll just make one comment now, and I'll reserve the right to have some more later. But I'd like to make a motion that we issue an RFP to reopen the sale.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to issue a new RFP for the sale of the building. We have a second from Mr. Garrity. Discussion. Mr. McDevitt?
I'm going to vote against this rather than, I hope we don't have a long discussion on this, but I don't think it's in the county's best interest to sell, and I underscore the word sell, property. I think we incur potential liability long-term, so I'm going to vote against it. And nothing to do with Mr. Perkins. I wish you the very best, but that's my position. No.
Any other discussion? Mr. Strow and then Mr. Lowe.
Yes, I mean, we're currently making, $84,000 a year in revenue on this building. And 10 years, that's $840,000. We did have the building appraised. It wasn't subdivided at the time. I don't know if the new subdivision makes a difference in the appraisal or not. But I seem to remember that the last appraisal was, what was the amount?
I believe it was 600 and change, is that right?
$630,000 to $650,000.
650.
Yeah. I would not be in favor of selling this building for anything less than what it's appraised for, given its revenue potential. And, 10 years from now, we made $840,000, and you know what? We still own the building. And 10 years from now, what's that building's value? So if you take a look at realtors and other successful business people that are out there, without mentioning names, they're the ones that make the investments in the property. They're the ones that are making excellent returns on these properties. And so if the county wishes to have the biggest bang for the buck for the taxpayer dollar, I think it's in the best interest for us to keep this building as long as we're receiving these revenues. However, I would entertain selling it if the amount was sufficient enough. But $400,000 isn't there.
Thank you, Mr. Strow. Mr. Loeb, and then Ms. Bramer, and then Mr. Garrity.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do support the resolution, but I have a question about the resolution that we passed regarding the 6-month lease. Where is that all going to stand?
The resolution authorized the chairman to execute that lease, and the agreement hasn't been executed. If we were going to move forward with a sale, it wouldn't be our intention to execute that agreement. It wouldn't be fair for the current tenant to to sign the new agreement and then be evicted.
But right now, Mr. Chairman, may we have a month by month, and the RFP is not going to happen tomorrow. So it's going to drag out. Do we have to do month by month approvals and leasing it to D&G? If we sell it, it's not going to happen for a couple months at the very least.
Because we've RFP'd this twice, we could get an RFP out on the street fairly quickly, and we would have a short window for responses. So hopefully it wouldn't take more than a month or two.
Thank you.
Mr. Garrity, then Ms. Bramer, then Mr. Diamond.
Well, I mean, I agree with Supervisor Stroud. We need to weigh all the, the leasing versus selling, but I do think we're required by law probably to update our appraisal of that property, and we have to stay somewhere close to appraisal price. Is that not correct? In order to sell property?
As long as we abide by County Law 512, we can sell the property for whatever we want.
Ms. Bramer?
Thanks, and that is making sure that we get fair price.
It has to be a competitive process.
So we will be able to comply with that law, putting it out for an RFP, and whoever bids will get, that's what the market will bear for this purchase price will come out of the RFP process.
We have to have a competitive process, and we have to sell to the highest responsible bidder. I believe you could pass a local law deciding to sell to a different bidder if there was a higher bid, but that's the legal construct.
Can I just follow up?
Sure.
Thanks. So I would support us putting out the RFP and seeing what responses we get. I do have concerns about the current tenant and being fair to that business as well. So we need to, be careful about entering into the 6-month lease and then turning around and canceling it on them.
Mr. Diamond?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will support the RFP today. We've been through this process now a couple of different occasions. We generally had one significant bidder respondee, and that would be Perkins Recycling. I look at this in a different perspective, that we're getting cash in hand, we're getting out from underneath the environmental issues that Mr. Perkins is willing to undertake. We're not going to have to spend anywhere between $80,000 and $100,000 on the repair of the roof. Mr. Perkins is going to rebuild the scale house that is deplorable. We're going to get out from underneath a agreement with that the current owner has housekeeping issues, and we're constantly dealing with that. We're putting the property on the tax rolls, and it's going to allow me to support building this OES building without going into fund balance and going and acquiring new debt. So I think it's a win all around for the county. We get out from underneath the maintenance costs that are associated with the building. We've been limping along with 6-month agreements. I want to point out that in 2011, Mr. Perkins was paying $8,000 a month. That's 8 to 9 years ago. We've kind of gone backwards as far as the rental agreement. I think here's a great opportunity for us to turn this property into a significant building that's willingness to have his business there and pay taxes to the town of Queensbury and Warren County. I just don't see anything negative in regards to that.
Any other discussion from the committee? Mr. Wild and then Mr. Stroud.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'd like to respond to a couple of points as well as add some comments from myself. The lease of $7,000 a month does equate to $84,000 a year, but it doesn't take into account what we need to spend to maintain that building. And from the little bit of research that I've been able to do, and Kevin, maybe you can help confirm this, but the roof is going to be well over $100,000. There's doors that need to be fixed because the access to this building has the commercial doors that are in total disrepair. There's lighting issues, there's other issues, and if you roll that up to say it's over $200,000, That's, the debt service on that is basically $23,000 a year. So that would have to be subtracted from the $84,000. In addition to that, there's $10,000 in maintenance that you'd have to take off per year, which brings it down to approximately $50,000 a year in revenue. Then you need to also add in or subtract from that the taxes that this entity would now be providing to the town and the counties. So it's not such a lucrative situation that we have. That being said, I think there's a philosophical question we need to answer, and this is based on a conversation that I had with one of the commercial realtors in the area yesterday. I think who's well respected. The comment that he made I thought was telling. He said, does government really need to be in the business of competing with the private sector for industrial property? So we own this property, we're basically competing with the private sector. To me, that doesn't make sense. I don't think we need to be in that position. Again, it's adding it to the tax rolls. We can maintain, maybe possibly increase employment by having something like this done. And another issue related to the lease and the revenue from the lease, this person mentioned to me that when you have a single tenant, that revenue is speculative. We never know what might happen with that tenant, and if they decide that they don't want to pursue this lease any longer, all of a sudden we have a vacancy issue, and we have no idea how much longer it would take for us to be able to refill that and at what rate. So I think we need to kind of take a more holistic approach to this, and as you guys have all known, and ladies, that I'm a big proponent of getting out of this business and selling this property, and that's why I made the motion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Who else? I forgot it was Mr. Strauss. Okay.
Yeah, well, just two things. One is, just a clarification, is that we would not have to sell to the highest responsible bidder. We could reject all bids. All right, just to make the air clear. The other thing is, you know what? We could sit here and argue back and forth, but I would support whatever's best for the taxpayer. So if we want to do a cost-benefit analysis of sale at a certain price versus leasing at a certain price, and what is the long-term benefit for the taxpayers, that's where I'll land, whatever the cost-benefit analysis says. So I would support doing a cost-benefit analysis.
And Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Weil?
just one more comment. One of the reasons that really kind of sparked my renewed interest in this is the fact that we do have a emergency services building that's on the works right now. It's $450,000. The plan was to take that out of the general fund. I think everybody will admit that there's a recession on the horizon because our economy is cyclical. To me, it makes sense to save that money into the general fund for that rainy day that might be coming, and use the proceeds for this to help cover that and keep our fund balance high.
Ms.
Thank you.
Kramer?
The other thing that's weighing on my mind is that we got this building initially to run our recycling program out of, but we don't have a county recycling program like that anymore, so I'm not hearing any municipal purpose for keeping that building. So if it, I mean, I understand taxpayer dollars are important, but keeping a building just because we're making some money off of it and with no county purpose for the building, since we're moving OES out of there, doesn't seem to make sense to me anymore to keep it.
Mr. McDevitt?
Say one final thing. I accept pretty much all of the arguments presented here. If this was a normal piece of property. This is not a normal piece of property. This is a property that has historically had environmental problems. What do those environmental issues mean long-term in terms of liability for this county? So if we're talking about the average piece of property, I accept most of these arguments, but we're not. So I'll leave it at that.
I'm going to open up, and Mr. McGowan wanted to say something.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I want to, come out and thank Mike Supervisor Weil for really doing all the legwork. He's made some really good points. I happen to agree with him, especially with the OES building coming up, and Supervisor Diamond for really spelling it out. Really, I agree. Also with John that we can do an analysis, but I see nothing but a liability here for our county, and we have an opportunity to roll it over into something that we need here that be used by two departments, so I'd say I'd be in favor of this if I happen to be on the committee.
In favor of what?
Putting out the motion.
RFP?
The RFP, yes.
Any other comments from anyone else in the room? Yes, Mr.
Mr. Chairman,
Wild?
thank you. I'll be brief again. I just need to respond to Supervisor McDevitt's comments. I think if you look at the EPA and the DEC documents related to this parcel, it has not been considered contaminated. It's always been clear of that. The risk is it's adjacent to the brownfield that was the old CVIG plant. So this property is not contaminated. It's just adjacent. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, so there's a motion on the floor to put out an RFP to see if there's any interest in selling the building, purchasing the building. So we did have a second. I believe it was Mr. Garrity on the second. Boy, that's a good memory, huh? It's been 15 minutes, 20 minutes. I'm going to give myself a kudo. I don't remember who did the initial motion, but I remember the second. So, Mr. Wild, okay. So I'm going to call the question now. We've had thorough discussion on this. And all in favor of putting out the RFP, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
2 opposed, Mr. Stroud and Mr. McDevitt. Okay, that's where we'll go then, and we'll proceed accordingly.
We'll get it out ASAP.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Mr. Garrity?
I have one thing, and I'm not sure. The Cornell Cooperative Extension, the roof up there on that building was approved 2 years ago, funding for that, and the roof's never been put on. So we really should think about if we can get that done.
We are.
Yeah, I did.
We're looking at it right now. Frank and his guys are probably going to be the ones to do the roof.
Okay.
I believe you've had discussion with Mr. Seeley on that, Dr. Seeley. I talked to him just this week on that, in fact.
Okay.
And he said it's progressing, so, with you guys, so.
I just remind, we lose sight of it, and I know that was a big passion of Dan Gerard's to get that done.
Yep. Dan always wants a roof over his head. I don't blame
That's
him.
right. Get that done. If you see him, Jack, let me know.
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn? I don't see, unless there's any discussion from anyone who wants to say anything about anything? I don't see it. Okay, is there a motion to adjourn? Mr. Garrity, second by Mr. Wild. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Adjourned.